Do you ever feel stuck, like you're living your life on autopilot? Are you ready to shift into high gear and reach the success you so richly deserve? Welcome to the Play Big Movement podcast. I am your host, Sharon Lechter, entrepreneur, business strategist, and best-selling author. Playing big is not about settling for good enough or being comfortable. It is about reaching your highest potential and achieving your greatest success. Join me in my Play Big movement as I interview top experts in business, money, and entrepreneurship, all ready to serve you and to help you play big, be number one in your field, live your legacy, and create maximum impact. Welcome, everyone, to the Play Big Movement podcast. I've had some pretty special people on this, but today I'm really excited to welcome a dear friend and someone that I'm sure you've already heard about him and what his incredible movement, Mr. Bob Burg. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Sharon. What a delight to get to be with you again.
Well, I'm excited because you just launched a new book, so I want our folks to know a little bit about your history, because I actually first learned of Bob Burg with one of your first books called Endless Referrals.
Yeah.
You kind of took the world by storm on that one, and certainly it was a success by referral because people would read it and share it with everyone else. So it was definitely walking the talk. Then you partnered up with John David Mann and wrote The Go-Giver, which is just brilliant. The best word I can say, brilliant. And it has taken the world by storm and started an entire series of Go-Giver books. And so I want to acknowledge you and applaud you. And in today's market with publishing, as hard as it is with so many new titles coming out, you've really created a very strong and meaningful and impactful brand. So congratulations.
Thank you, Sharon. Of course, you're the master of doing that. You've had a few of those yourself, I think.
Well, we've had a few, but it's been over the last 20 years. So and I'm excited about your new one because it's just so timely, the Go-Giver Influencer. And as it relates, we're going to talk a lot about the book, but before we get there, I just want you to kind of like open up a little bit to the folks watching about the Play Big movement and what playing big means to you, because you've always played big. So share a little bit about your own personal philosophy.
When I think of playing big, I think about potential. And I think about doing your best to live up to your potential. I don't think some people do. Some people probably go beyond their potential. But most of us, there's that, what's the right word? Not sliding scale, but, a ongoing 0 to 100, where some of us do a good job of it. Some don't live up near to what we could. Some go pretty far. Others, really take it to that level that's magnificent. I don't think I've taken it to that level at all. In fact, a lot of times I feel like I could be playing a lot bigger than I am. But to a certain degree, I think I have played big. I've seen something that could be and have decided to go after it. And, to the degree I have put the work into doing it, because that's always a big thing. You can have the vision, but if you're not willing to take the action on the vision, it's nothing more than a fantasy.
And that's so true. A lot of us, there are so many people out there and speakers and that say, if you think good thoughts, good things will happen to you. But we were given, arms and legs and a brain, and as Napoleon Hill says, going the extra mile. You have to put the work into it. And those of us that have attained this kind of success know that it's not easy. You really have to focus, knowing what it is your definiteness purpose is, but really focusing on driving the results you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of your concepts, which I love, I guess is one of your personal mantras, is your level of income increases based on the number of people that you serve.
Yeah.
So, and that's really the kind of the philosophy behind the Go-Giver. So tell us how the Go-Giver was born.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I had the book Endless Referrals, which was sort of my first big book. And that was a traditional how-to book. Mm-hmm. But I've always loved reading parables. And so I think starting with Og Mandino's Greatest Salesman in the World, which, it's longer than what we think of as the parable, but it was still a parable, it's still a story. And Klassen's Richest Man in Babylon, and there were all sorts. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, the Doctors Blanchard and Johnson with the 1 Minute series. Great books. And throughout the years, there have been tons of them, and I always loved them. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we could take the basic premise of endless referrals, which was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. Now, I had an entire how-to teaching about that, but it's still, I thought, what if we could take that and turn it into a parable? And so I first thought, well, so what is the major characteristic about someone who builds these kinds of relationships so that they're effective and that they're sustainable? Well, that person's always giving. They're giving value to everyone. So I came up with the name, the Go-Giver, as a playoff to the more well-known Go-Getter. However, we love go-getters for the same exact reason you and I were talking. In fact, there was a great book called The Go-Getter, Another Business Parable by Henry Kine, which is one of my favorite books. We love go-getters because, again, action is key. Don't take action, and the best thoughts, greatest intention in the world isn't going to get you anything. And so in fact, we always say we want people to be both go-getters, people of action, and go-givers, people focused on creating value for others. We don't want people to be go-takers, right? People who feel entitled, right, to take without having.
Go-takers, right?
Exactly.
The world is full of givers and takers. We want givers, so.
Right. And so, and in Napoleon Hill's book, where he talked about the day of the go-getter has surpassed, is ended, he's been surpassed by the go-giver. I think what he was really talking about was go-takers, because obviously he was a person of action who believed in action. So I asked John David May. He was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for, and I knew how brilliant John was. Now, at the time, most people didn't. Now, this guy's in demand all over. But back then, only a small kind of circle of people knew how brilliant this guy was. So I asked John if he would be the co-author, lead writer, and storyteller of this idea for a book I had called The Go-Giver, and just a tiny little bit of a sketch of what it would be. So he and his then fiance, now wife, Anna, they were in Tampa visiting her mom. They came over across state to Jupiter, Florida, where I live, about a 4-hour drive. And we had about a 4-hour dinner discussing the idea of the book. But he was still busy, and he had to think on the idea. About 3 weeks later, he called me and he said, I think we got something here. And I remember thinking, yes, because I knew John could take this idea and that we could work together with it. But with his storytelling magic, we could create something.
And that's the first of how many books now in the series?
Now there's 4 books altogether. 3 of them are parables.
Mm-hmm. And your most recent one, I want to talk a little bit about that because but before we do, as you released these first 3, did you have some naysayers who basically said you were like looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses, or did you really have nothing but support from the market?
Well, we had 24 publishers who said no to us. Mm. So those were naysayers, I guess. And some of them just said, they kind of liked the idea, but they weren't in the market for this kind of books. A few said the world doesn't need one more parable. Some just didn't like it and so forth. So, it was one of those, which you expect. It's part of the game.
So those of you watching this, again, that's perseverance. That's knowing that you are on to something. And just because somebody turns you down doesn't mean you don't keep going.
And that's a great point. And what we also did is we considered the feedback and asked, where does it make sense and where doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay, because we weren't going to also say, oh, well, we got this great thing that nobody can. No, we knew there were things to learn from, if not the story itself, although there were some good corrections about areas in that regard. But it was more about the marketing and the platform and everything that went around with what would help us to be able to create a movement with this. And so it was a whole other year making some adjustments on the story, but really in how we would market it, until finally our great agent, McBride Literary Agency, Margaret McBride, found Portfolio, a division of now Penguin Random House.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been just such an amazing publishing partner, which also goes to show the right people came when the right people were supposed to. Okay, well, good. They've been fantastic to work with. I've worked with a number of publishers in my career, and they've all been nice people. Some have different advantages and strengths and weaknesses. These people are wonderful, and couldn't have picked a better one to.
And you
to
know
do
what?
this series.
I want everybody to listen to that, because probably 9 out of the 10 authors I talk to complain about their publisher, because they don't realize that when you get a publisher, it's still your responsibility to market your book.
Right.
It's up to you. It's the author is 24/7 promoting the book. Your publisher gets it to market, gives you feedback, has the ability to help you on the marketing side, but it's always really up to the author to really drive that and lead that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. Well, I want you to talk about your new book. And one of the taglines that I saw on the information that we have about it is the fact that this isn't just a parable. This is a really important discussion with what's happening in the world today. And in there you talk about there's a major problem in the world today. It's not people disagreeing with one another. It's that they can't disagree civilly, and most importantly, persuasively. So of all of your books, I think this one is coming out as a kind of a hot topic with what we see in politics and the world, not just in politics, but even in our civil unrest. And I mean, it just the Me Too movement. There's so much angst in the world. So talk a little bit about this book, why it was written, and what your goal is with it.
Well, I think you summarize it beautifully. There's angst and there's anger, and it seems as though everywhere you go, there are two different, almost teams. It used to be people defended their principles. Now it's as though they're defending their teams.
Right.
Because
black and white.
Exactly. And now, and we see this so often on social media, but we also see it at, whether it's family gatherings, the charity event, or some social situation, where if someone disagrees with your political view or whatever it might be, not only are they wrong, okay, but they are evil. They have bad intent. They want bad things to happen to. I mean, we see this all the time. You look at a typical Facebook discussion and somebody comes up with a statement, a policy statement or a thought, and somebody writes back, "People like you are absolutely disgusting, horrible human beings. Are you trying to ruin this country, or do you not care about the lives of," I don't know, whatever it is. Now, notice, Sharon, that when someone is insulted like this, they never respond by writing back, "Thank you so much for pointing out the error of my ways. I hadn't thought about it before until you clarified for me as you did. I now renounce everything I've believed in up till now, and I'm joining your side." Isn't going to happen. And so not only are people being mean and nasty and insulting and vitriolic, they're not being influential. They're not being persuasive. So, you've got kind of a double whammy.
Totally combative, the opposite of
persuasive.
Yeah.
And there are ways to handle things much differently. Sure, gentler, kinder, more tactful, diplomatic, but also more persuasively and influentially.
Well,
and that's why we wrote
a friend of mine, I'd like to say close personal friend, but she's more of an acquaintance friend, is Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And that's for her entire career. She was known for, encouraged, and really was the mother of civil discourse, of bringing people together on different sides of a view and finding that central way of agreement. And so if you talk about somebody who had great influence, certainly Sandra Day O'Connor did and does still today. I just, people ask me who I look up to, and she's definitely one of my top sheroes, because of the impact that she had on the world and the decisions that she made, and really encouraging. And still today with the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, which is her foundation, that really encourages civil discourse. And
Mm,
that, underlining the word civil, civil discourse.
right.
And so I'm going to actually get one of your books to give to her, because I think she will love seeing this message coming out
Oh,
today.
thank you.
So,
Mhm.
but how did this book come about?
Well, so we just really thought, the time is right.
Mhm.
And we thought we could do it, as we do, because the Go Giver series is it's a business series, yet it's also personal. So we always try to have sort of a subplot in there that has to do with personal, because as you know, success, sure, there's many important aspects. There's financial, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, social, relational. The success is across the board. So yes, it's business success, but we also wanted it to be personal success too. So really, we just kind of got together and thought, and John and I thought, what could we really write a story about that was going to be interesting and that was going to get the message across that we wanted, and also just be a lot of fun. So that's kind of how we came up with this one, and really that's how it happened. And we wrote it in a fairly quick period of time.
And it's
And
called The Go Giver Influencer.
influencer,
And it's
yeah.
available already on Amazon or in major bookstores.
Mhm.
So share with us a little bit about the response you've had for the book.
Well, there's been a lot of really good energy behind it. We had the launch day, and I don't put a whole lot of stock at it. To me, the launch day isn't an end all be all, but it kind of gives you a clue. It gives you a hint as to the energy behind the book. And of course, you set that up with the relationships you have and the relationships you've built with people. And fortunately, a lot of people got behind this, and we're very fortunate anyway, because the Go Giver brand has been out there for 10 years now. So there's a lot of people who were ready for another book to come out. So they were very, very supportive. But this to me is a long haul. The Go Giver itself has been out 10 years. And as you know, I still do interviews on it. I do often a couple of interviews a day. It's long haul for me. But this book is really, to me, it's the parable version of my life's mission. I had a book out, or I have a book out, called Adversaries into Allies, which is sort of the how-to aspect of this. And to me, it's probably the most important book I've ever written, at least as a sole author.
And you sent one to me, and I love it. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And so we're thinking a parable version. Of course, parables are much, much more fun to read. They're shorter. And so we're hoping, the people really, really grasp onto this. But I really, in a sense, Sharon, I feel like I'm carrying on my dad's legacy, because he's a guy who, when it comes to people skills, okay, I never knew anyone better. And with him, unlike with many people, unlike with me, with him, it was very natural. He had a gift. Now, he came up in a very, the immigrant slum Americana type of thing. And he ended up being a very successful entrepreneur. But just the way with people he always had, that people, I always, I have a saying, and that is, the single greatest people skill is a highly developed and authentic interest in the other person. Now, Dad didn't tell me that saying. It's just what I observed by watching him. And he would meet someone and was absolutely so interested in them and knowing about them, and in what I call making them feel genuinely good about themselves. And so I try to carry that on. Now, I've read the books, of course. I love How to Win Friends and Influence People, and so many of the wonderful, wonderful books that have been written through the years on influence and persuasion and people skills. I've got a library full of them. I love them. But I'll tell you what, 95% of it I learned from watching my dad.
Well, and that's a testament.
So my playing big is trying to really is carrying on what he taught so many people.
Well, some of the aspects in the book, you talk about, in essence, like 5 pillars. One is, to master your emotions. And, my audience knows I always say high emotions, low intelligence. So you have to kind of get your emotions under control. And then you talk about stepping into the other person's shoes. And that's where, when I'm talking about my career, I've always wanted to do, we say win-win. Well, that's because you want something that both sides all boats rise, right, with the rising tide. So everybody should get something that they want.
Yeah.
And you can't figure out what they want unless you put yourself in their position and you ask them a lot of questions.
Yes.
And one of the things I talk about a lot with my group, Bob, is the power of the question. Talk about your other three is set the frame, communicate with tact and empathy, and let go of having to be right. But I want to really focus on the master your emotions and stepping into the other person's shoes, and have your thoughts on those.
Sure. Well, the sages asked the question, who is mighty? And they answered, that person who can control their own emotions and make of an enemy or of a potential enemy a friend. This is where it all begins, because it's only when we can control our own emotions are we even in a position to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. We know this, but when we lose our cool, when we allow what someone else says or does to push our emotional hot button and we become frustrated or we become defensive or we become angry, right? Not only can we not be part of the solution, we're just as much a part of the problem, if not more so, than they are. Now, we know this, and yet how often do we allow that to happen? And we lose control and, we feel lousy afterwards. But, why does it happen? Well, we're human beings, and we are emotional beings. We are created that way. We'd like to think we're logical, and to a certain extent we are, but we are emotional. We are emotionally driven to the point that we make emotional decisions, and we back up those emotional decisions with logic. We rationalize. And if you break up the word rationalize, it simply means we tell ourselves rational lies.
Justify, laying blame and justifying. Even
Exactly.
though we know we're being wrong, we actually are in the wrong. We want to justify it. We want to bolster our position.
Exactly. And that's emotional. And so what we're not saying is that you should deny your emotions. We're not saying you should forego your emotions. Actually, that would not be logical, right? Since we're emotional beings. What we're saying is that you can temporarily set them aside. What we're saying is that you need to be able to master them as opposed to they mastering you. Or as one of my great friends, Dondi Scumaci, a great leadership speaker and practitioner, she says, by all means, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car. In the story, one of the mentors, because there are two mentors and two proteges in the story, one of the mentors, a retired judge, Celia Henshaw, she suggests to Jackson, her protege, that he think of himself as a company. And in this company, and of course you'll relate to this being the business person you are, there's a board of directors and there's a CEO. The board of directors is your emotions. The CEO is your logic. Now, a CEO is going to listen to their board of directors. They'll listen to their advice. They will consider it, and we should listen to our emotions. So we should consider them. They have things to tell us. But the ultimate decision needs to be done by the CEO. The ultimate decision needs to be based on logic. If your goal is to make the best decisions that is going to give you the best odds of the right results.
I love that. And when I'm talking to people about high emotion, low intelligence, also, we particularly with Outwitting the Devil, we talk about where did those emotions come from? Sometimes our emotions are triggered because of something in our subconscious or in our past. And so we tend to overreact, which makes it even worse because the person that we're facing may not even be the cause. They were just the trigger that brought up a lot of this buried stuff. So the whole concept of the go-giver influencer is something that really helps us really look inside and think about, the decisions that we're making and, not just our own decisions, but the decisions that people that we work with are making. And we can recognize when others are doing it probably a little easier than we are when we're making emotional decisions.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things here. First, and I love that. First, that when we can control our own emotions, when we can master our own emotions and help others to work effectively within theirs, now our influence is ready to go sky high, just like Judge O'Connor. And the other thing is where influence is all about the other person, right? Great influence is never about the influencer. It's always about the people whose lives we're trying to touch, whose lives we're trying to add value to. The great influencer is always asking themselves questions such as, how does what I'm asking this other person to do, how does it align with their goals, their needs, their wants, their desires, their values, their problems they need to have solved, right? So while genuine influence at its most effective is all about the other person, it begins with us. It begins with our being able to master our own emotions, because only then do we have the context for focusing on that other person correctly.
So all of you that are watching or listening to this, I just want you to rewind and listen to what Bob was just saying, because it's so important. He talks about, bringing your emotions along with you. Your emotions are like the board of directors. You're the CEO. The parable that I use when I talk about, take your emotions and set them in the passenger seat, and say, okay, what am I supposed to learn from you? But you're still the one driving the bus. And so
I love it. Love it.
I think it's something, I say the same thing about mistakes that you've made, Bob. I say, set them over there.
Yeah.
Say, okay, I screwed up. I made those mistakes. Now, what am I supposed to learn from you? And then kick them out the door and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
But I want all of you to listen to this at least 2 or 3 times, because the nuggets that Bob has shared has been incredible about really paying attention to your own emotions, understanding the value of the other person and stepping into their shoes. So Bob, you have so much to offer. You have some online courses. How can people find you?
Probably the best way is just to go to The Go Giver, without the hyphen, thegogiver.com. And if they're interested, they can click on the graphic of the book with the purple cover. That's the Go Giver Influencer. And it will take them to a page where they can get 2 free chapters, so they can read the beginning of the story, see if it resonates with them. If they like where it's headed, then they can always click through to one of the online bookstores.
Well, and I guarantee you will. And I encourage all of you to go out there and buy Bob's book, because the value that I've gotten from reading it is incredible. And I know it will be for you too. So Bob, as in closing, in the whole concept of the Go Giver Influencer and the Play Big movement, what would be your kind of last thing you want to share with our audience?
I think it's understanding that when you communicate, tact should never be confused with compromise. We can always speak tactfully to others. We can speak kindly and respectfully to others without compromising our values. And I think if we can hold that and keep that in mind, we're pointing in the right direction.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Bob, for being with me. Will you come back, I hope?
Well, thank you. Well, you're one of my heroes and mentors. All you have to ever do is ask, and I'm right there.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for being with us today, whether you're watching or listening, and know that you can join us on our private Facebook page, listen to the podcast, come to my weekly Ask Sharon Facebook Lives, and we will see you on the other side. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this segment of the Play Big Movement podcast. Please subscribe to iTunes and leave us a review, as well as join us in other areas of social media, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Sharon Lechter, and for Facebook, author Sharon Lechter. Thank you so much and have a fabulous day.